Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. The Peak Lord from Sunset Peak let out a cold harumph and waved his right sleeve. Instantly, a powerful force descended onto the trembling Sunset Peak disciples. To them, it felt like mountains were crushing down on them, provoking miserable shrieks of pain. The Beihan siblings felt even more pressure than the others. Their faces twisted in pain as their cultivation bases shook. Although their hatred for Bai Xiaochun surged, they couldn't let any of it show on their faces. The lot of you had better get the hell back to the North Bank this instant. Go into secluded meditation and don't come out for 10 years. Although the Peak Lord of Sunset Peak was the one to take action, these were disciples from his mountain peak, so he was actually protecting them to some extent. Although he seemed to be acting harshly, he actually was sympathetic to their cause. With a wave of a sleeve, he caused a powerful wind to spring up that swept the Sunset Peak disciples off into the distance. Looking back at Bai Xiaochun, he plastered another smile onto his face and slowly said, "Xiaochun, can you remember now?" Bai Xiaochun knew that he shouldn't push things too far. Things had already worked out quite well for him, so he cleared his throat in satisfaction. "Ha ha ha, there's no need for all of this, elder brother. As a prestige disciple, and the junior brother of the sect leader, how could I lower myself to the same level as those raucous sect nephews? What a bunch of naughty and mischievous kids." The way Bai Xiaochun was acting as if he really were of the same generation as him caused the Peak Lord of Sunset Peak to grimace inwardly. Off to the side, Zheng Yuandong cleared his throat, and yet again wished he could take back his impulsive decision from years before. Bai Xiaochun ignored the strange looks and puffed his chest out. Suppressing his feeling of pride, he prepared to finish explaining the pill formula. At that point, Li Qinghao cleared his throat. "Self-created pill formulas are precious to apothecaries," he said coolly. "I wonder what else the North Bank has prepared to offer in exchange for the formula." Bai Xiaochun blinked, and then stood there looking up at the 4 North Bank Peak Lords. The Peak Lords exchanged glances. Then the old woman from Iris Petal Peak pulled out a green pearl filled with swirling mist. The magnetic pulses it emitted caused everything in the area to fill with ripples. "This is a protomagnetic pearl," she explained, "extracted from the heart of a protomagnetic giant. It even contains a bit of pure protomagnetic power. Used on its own, it can exert influence on all magical items within a certain area. Even to Foundation establishment cultivators, it could be considered an extraordinary treasure. It would be difficult to use directly with only a qi condensation cultivation base. However, the Heavenhorn Pavilion happens to have a pair of magnetic spirit wings which, if used with the protomagnetic pearl, can be a powerful trump card for the qi condensation stage. With those wings, you could move so fast that even a Foundation establishment cultivator would have a hard time keeping up with you. Bai Xiaochun, having taken first place in the chosen battles, you have the right to go select any treasure you want from the chosen pavilion. I've already taken the liberty of bringing the magnetic spirit wings to give you, along with the pearl, in exchange for the pill formula." Even as the words left her mouth, the old woman waved her right hand, causing a set of green wings to appear. They, along with the pearl, flew over to float in front of Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's eyes began to shine. He could already move with incredible quickness, but if a Foundation establishment cultivator really wanted to chase him down, he wouldn't be able to outrun them. However, with the protomagnetic pearl and the magnetic spirit wings in combination with his speed, he could move unbelievably quickly. A life-saving object such as that was something that left his heart pounding. Furthermore, the old woman continued with a stiff smile, "If luck is on your side, you might even be able to sense the manifestation of protomagnetic power. With that, you might be able to gain enlightenment of one of the top 10 secret magics of the Spirit Stream Sect, arcane gravitational repulsion." Bai Xiaochun licked his lips, and was just about to agree, when he suddenly stopped and looked over at Li Qinghao to see whether or not he approved. He had long since come to view Li Qinghao as one of his own relatives, and as such, would follow his lead. If Li Qinghao asked him to hand over the pill formula, then Bai Xiaochun would do so without hesitation. To him, it was just a pill formula. To the North Bank, it was like a holy relic. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun had lots of mystery pills in his bag of holding. In fact, he was already coming to the conclusion that he should start testing some of them out to see what wondrous effects they might have. Li Qinghao glanced at the proto-magnetic pearl and the magnetic spirit wings, then looked over at the 4 North Bank Peak Lords. Eventually, his gaze came to rest on the old woman. Eyes glittering, he suddenly said, "Add in one of the other 10 secret magics, the legacy of the North Bank, the Water Swamp Kingdom." As soon as the words left his mouth, sect leader Zheng Yuandong's eyelids twitched. "Impossible," barked the Peak Lord of Sunset Peak angrily. He wasn't the only one to disagree so vehemently. The Peak Lord of Archway Peak, the old man, glared at Li Qinghao with wide eyes. "Li the Swindler appears again," he sneered. "This is preposterous. The Water Swamp Kingdom is a legacy of the North Bank, one of the top 10 secret magics of the Spirit Stream Sect. It's a top-rated technique on the same level as ghosts haunt the night. There is absolutely no way we'll give it to someone from the South Bank." Bai Xiaochun looked up at the commotion above, and when he heard the Peak Lord from Archway Peak call Li Qinghao Li the Swindler, his jaw dropped. "Is that supposed to be a joke?" Li Qinghao said coldly, flicking his sleeve. "1,000 years ago, ghosts haunt the night was the legacy of Violet Cauldron Peak. You North Bank people were happy to take it away and trade, but now that the South Bank wants to trade for one of your legacy secret magics, you refuse? Ludicrous." The North Bank's Peak Lords were at a loss for words. The Peak Lord of Ghostfang Peak was a partially translucent figure whose features couldn't be seen clearly. Sighing, he said, "Ghosts haunt the night is a perfect match for Ghostfang Peak. Besides, all that happened years ago. It's not worth bringing up now. As far as the Water Swamp Kingdom goes, only a handful of people have ever successfully cultivated it, such as Patriarch Heavenwing, 8,000 years ago. Nobody else did anything with it other than produce some useless spirits. It's far too difficult. Peak Lord Li, why are you making things hard for us?" "No Water Swamp Kingdom? No pill formula," Li Qinghao said with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron. Bai Xiaochun looked up in wonderment as the Peak Lords argued about the Water Swamp Kingdom. He had been under the impression that the offer was good enough already, although the Water Swamp Kingdom had always sounded interesting to him. At the same time, he had a new understanding of Li Qinghao. He was truly providing a shining example of how to rip people off. Could that be why he had been called Li the Swindler? Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun looked up at Li Qinghao, his eyes shining with admiration. The North Bank Peak Lords grumbled a bit, but in the end, agreed to the demands. Although their legacy secret magic was important, the medicinal pill was even more precious to them. Moments later, Li Qinghao directed Bai Xiaochun to explain the complete formula for the aphrodisiac pill. Considering how important the pill was, the Peak Lords had long since sealed the area tight so that no one would be able to eavesdrop. After Bai Xiaochun finished, the 4 Peak Lords took some time to examine the complete formula. Then they nodded, and the old woman from Iris Betel Peak tossed a blue jade slip out toward Bai Xiaochun. "The Water Swamp Kingdom is one of the most powerful of the 10 secret magics. It is a divine ability which requires that you observe all types of beasts, and use that knowledge to create your own life essence spirit. Creating something from nothing, use the water swamp to give it form, and summon a physical kingdom. For the past 10,000 years, everyone in the Spirit Stream Sect who has attempted to form a life essence spirit have produced simple, ordinary creatures. The only exceptions are Patriarch Heavenwing, who formed a domineering Heavenwing gargoyle, as well as a few others like him. As for what type of life essence spirit is formed, that depends on the cultivator's understanding of spirit creatures. If 100 people cultivated the Water Swamp Kingdom, 100 different life essence spirits would result, some powerful, some weak. Some, like the Heavenwing gargoyle, were shockingly powerful. Others produced nothing more than a bunny or a snake. Bai Xiaochun, you are a South Bank disciple, and although there is competition between the North and South Banks, we are all one family. I truly hope that you can succeed in cultivating your own life essence spirit." Of course, despite her words, neither she nor any of the other 3 Peak Lords truly believed that Bai Xiaochun would have any measure of success in his cultivation of the Water Swamp Kingdom. One reason for that, of course, was that the Water Swamp Kingdom required one to carefully observe and study a large number of spirit creatures, something that was virtually impossible to do on the South Bank. The transaction having been completed, the 4 Peak Lords from the North Bank left along with Zheng Yuandong. Li Qinghao stayed behind. There was warmth in his eyes, but it was hidden beneath the sharp look that suddenly appeared. He began by reprimanding Bai Xiaochun, telling him not to get arrogant over having taken first place in the chosen battles. He then gave him some tips regarding his cultivation base, and finally gave him some more detailed information regarding the bracelet he'd given him, as well as the proto-magnetic pearl. The proto-magnetic pearl and the magnetic spirit wings will be of great use to you. Take the time to get familiar with how to use them. As for the Water Swamp Kingdom, it's even more profound than the magic plant arsenal we have here on Fragrant Cloud Peak. By the way, the Dragon Mammoth Sea-forming scripture was created by the founding patriarch of the sect, who led the campaign from the Heavenspan Delta into the lower reaches. Make sure to study it well. It will make things much smoother for you when I teach you the magic plant arsenal technique. After giving some more exhortation, he turned to leave. Profoundly moved, Bai Xiaochun clasped hands and bowed deeply. However, he couldn't hold back from curiously asking, "Uncle Li, why did they call you Li the Swindler? That was ridiculous." Li Qinghao stopped in mid-stride. Face darkening, he glared back at Bai Xiaochun and said, "Stop prying into the affairs of adults. Just remember that we apothecaries treasure the Tao of medicine. We don't just give things out for free." With that, Li Qinghao left. The more Bai Xiaochun thought about the matter, the more his eyes began to shine with praise. He was now almost completely convinced that acquiring medicinal pills from Li Qinghao must be quite a pain for most people. After Li Qinghao left, Bai Xiaochun went back into his immortals cave. Now that he knew the Dragon Mammoth Sea-forming scripture was created by the founding patriarch of the sect, his heart swelled with admiration. In the introduction to the scripture, the founding patriarch talked about shackles. I wonder what exactly those shackles are. After some more thought, he came up with some ideas, but had no way to confirm whether or not they were correct. Shaking his head, he pulled out the proto-magnetic pearl and, following the instructions given by Li Qinghao, put it into his mouth and swallowed it. The pearl dissolved into mist which flowed through his body and came to rest in his dantian region. There was nothing uncomfortable about the sensation, and in fact, he even felt a bit lighter. After moving around a bit, he realized that he could move even more quickly than before. It was almost as if some strange connection now existed between him and his surroundings. Filled with a sense of wonder, he produced the magnetic spirit wings. They were green, and as diaphanous as the wings of a cicada, almost transparent. After a moment, Bai Xiaochun exhaled some spiritual energy onto the wings, and they began to melt. It took the time it takes an incense stick to burn, and during the process, his eyes glittered. Eventually, the wings melted into his palm, and then appeared on his back. Like blood dissolving in water, they became a part of him, and were as easy to control as his own arms. Expression brightening, he exercised a single thought, and the wings fluttered. He instantly transformed into nothing more than afterimages, shooting at high speed toward the wall of the Immortals' cave. He let out a shriek as he tried to stop, but was unfamiliar with controlling the wings and slammed into the wall. A boom rang out, and the entire Immortals' cave shook. Thankfully, Bai Xiaochun's fleshly body was quite tough, and nothing happened other than him ending up being embedded in the stone wall. After a long moment passed, he flopped down onto the ground and let out a groan. Gritting his teeth, he struggled to his feet and glanced up at the spot where he'd run into the wall. Not daring to perform any more tests indoors, he walked outside, summoned his courage, and then flapped the wings again. In the blink of an eye, he was far off in the distance. A few days later, he was much more familiar with how to control the speed of the wings, and it was a wonderful sensation. He almost felt invincible. Ha ha ha, I'm so fast that not even Elder Joe could catch me. He threw his head back and laughed uproariously as he flew a few circles in the air before returning to his Immortals' cave. Months flew by. Bai Xiaochun quickly became very familiar with the areas on Fragrant Cloud Peak set aside for the inner sect. Eventually, the novelty of being an inner sect disciple began to wear off. He spent most of his time in his Immortals' cave, either practicing cultivation or concocting medicine in his personal medicine concocting workshop. By this point, he had created quite a few aphrodisiac pills. He was happy. His purpose in practicing cultivation was to live forever, and the higher his cultivation base grew, the greater his longevity became. His main interest was concocting spirit medicines. After all, he still dreamed of concocting a pill that could help him live forever. In order to make that dream come true, he constantly worked with spirit medicine. However, the cruel reality of the situation was that after a few months passed, he found that, to his bitterness, he had run out of medicinal plants. Even though the prize for taking first place in the chosen battles had been 10,000 spirit stones, the ingredients for Tier 3 spirit medicines weren't sold in the market outside the sect. He could only rely on people from the cultivator clans to find them for him, and the prices were exorbitant. The best thing to do was build up enough merit points to be able to acquire the ingredients from the sect. Merit points, he thought as he sat there in his immortals cave, frowning. What he lacked most was merit points. After some hesitation, he left his immortals cave and went to the mission stele set aside for inner sect disciples. Back in the outer sect, the mission's office had always been packed, but the inner sect was different. Inner sect disciples were all very busy and viewed their time as precious. Only a few people could be seen in the area. Bai Xiaochun strolled up and stood in front of the stele, trying to pick a mission. "That one's way too dangerous," he muttered. "That one doesn't give enough merit points. I don't want any long-term missions." Eventually, his eyes came to rest on a mission assigned by one of the sect elders, which called for lifestealer cores. For every core provided, 1,000 merit points would be rewarded. It even provided the most common location to find lifestealers, which was in the Wildweed Mountains a short distance from the Spirit Stream sect. Muttering to himself in thought, Bai Xiaochun recalled the description of lifestealers from the 4th volume of Spirit Creatures. Actually, they weren't wild beasts, but rather, a miraculous parasitic life form. They would select a host, a wild beast of some sort, which they would then cause to grow a second head. When the second head was fully formed, the beast would then wither up and die, and the matured lifestealer would transform into a 9-days finch. During the parasitic phase of its life, it was extremely useful as an ingredient in various types of medicines. However, once it matured and exploded out from the second head, becoming a 9-days finch, it was completely useless. Furthermore, 9-days finches only lived for 9 days, after which they would die, producing a new lifestealer. The lifestealer would then select a new host, and the process would begin again. It was almost like the cycle of reincarnation. Lifestealers were very rare, and in some ways, they lived forever, eternally reincarnating over and over again. Bai Xiaochun clearly remembered how impressed he had been the first time he read about lifestealers in the 4th volume of Spirit Creatures. The hard part of this mission is actually finding the lifestealers. The Wildweed Mountains are too vast. It would be way too annoying to try to find them one by one. Accumulating merit points that way would be a waste of time. After doing some more research into the Wildweed Mountains, he confirmed that despite how vast they were, most animals were under the Foundation establishment level. Eventually, he decided to accept the mission. However, he didn't immediately set forth from the sect. First, he returned to his immortals cave to make a few preparations. Finally, he hopped onto the golden crow sword and shot off into the distance. The Wildweed Mountains weren't very far from the Spirit Stream sect. Considering his speed when using the golden crow sword, it would only take a day of travel to reach them. Unfortunately, due to the fact that his current cultivation base was too low to be able to fly for a long time, he had to alternate between flying and running. 4 days later, he finally reached the Wildweed Mountains. A majestic scene spread out in front of him, with lushly vegetated mountains rising up in all directions. It was like a never-ending jungle, from within which rose the cries of various birds and beasts. Instead of going to search for lifestealers, he explored the mountains for about half a month until he found a valley which acted as a natural pathway between two main parts of the jungle. There, he settled down in the branches of a tall tree and peered down into the valley below. Using normal search methods would be a waste of time, and would rely on blind luck. Even with fortune on my side, I might only find one. If I don't get lucky, I might not be able to find a single one in a month. It's time to show off how smart I am. Sticking his chin up, he blurred into motion, shooting off into the distance. The next day, he stood at the top of a mountain, feeling the direction of the wind. Just as he was about to produce an aphrodisiac pill, he suddenly thought of something, and called out at the top of his lungs, "Is anyone around? Are there any disciples from the Spirit Stream sect here?" From the high-pitched tone of his cry, it almost sounded like he was crying out for help. Some distance away, a figure could be seen in the jungle, fighting with a wild beast. It was an icily arrogant young man wearing the robe of an inner sect disciple of the Spirit Stream sect. When he heard Bai Xiaochun's cry, a look of scorn appeared in his eyes. Another disciple with a weak cultivation base who's overestimated himself and is now crying out for help. Only the strong should come out into the Wildweed Mountains. He arrogantly chose not to even attempt to help out. Although the sect emphasized teamwork, some people were naturally unsociable, and that couldn't be avoided. After crying out a few times but getting no response, Bai Xiaochun felt a bit more at ease. With that, he tossed out the aphrodisiac pill. Moments later, a popping sound could be heard as the pill exploded, transforming into a fine powder which was carried off by the wind. Soon, the animals some distance away, regardless of what they were doing, caught the scent of the powder in the wind and began to tremble. Eyes bloodshot, they began to howl at the tops of their lungs. As soon as the howling sounds rose up, 2 wings popped out behind Bai Xiaochun, and he sped away. The arrogant disciple from earlier suddenly noticed that the beast he was fighting had begun trembling. Its eyes turned red, and, howling, it pounced toward him. Badly frightened, the young man took to flight. Unfortunately, no matter what he did, the beast only continued to howl and chase him down. Its eyes were bright red, and it seemed to have gone mad. Shocked, the young man fled for his life until he had no choice but to cry out for help. By that time, Bai Xiaochun was too far away to hear. 6 hours later in another windy area, Bai Xiaochun cried out a few times, waited for a bit, and seeing that no one responded, threw out another aphrodisiac pill. Soon, the howls of beasts rose up. For the following 2 days, he ceaselessly traveled in a set perimeter around the valley he'd picked, throwing out aphrodisiac pills. He quickly covered a large area, within which all of the animals were going mad, howling at the tops of their lungs and lunging around violently. Seeing that he'd reached a point where things were almost beyond his control, Bai Xiaochun flew back to the valley he'd selected. Eyes shining, he waved the golden crow sword to cut open a small path in the trees, then pulled out a bunch of pheromone pills and crushed them. Soon, a fragrant aroma began to spread out. He was very careful not to get any of the powder on himself, and even as he backed away, changed into a new set of clothes just to be safe. Then he perched above the valley and looked down toward the path he'd created. "All right, lovely beasts. Hurry up," he said, humming a little tune as he waited eagerly. Time passed. The aroma of the pheromone pill slowly spread out, and the beasts which had been affected by the aphrodisiac pill slowly began to go more and more crazy. Howling, they began to charge toward the valley at top speed, more and more of them, like a surging tide that caused the ground to quake. Soon, the first wave of beasts was closing in, and Bai Xiaochun rose to his feet and looked down with rapt attention at the valley below. In the blink of an eye, a vast group of strange beasts could be seen charging down the path he'd created. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide at the sight of so many creatures. But then, his eyes glittered, and his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture. Instantly, the golden crow sword flew out toward a fierce-looking tiger. Shockingly, a second head was growing out of the tiger's back. Golden light flickered, and the second head exploded. A core flew out, which Bai Xiaochun expertly grabbed a hold of and then threw into his bag of holding. Next, the golden light flashed toward another 2-headed creature. The flood of beasts lasted for about 2 hours, and the valley was almost completely destroyed in the process. Bai Xiaochun was radiant with delight. His sword flashed over and over again, and by the time the flood of beasts had dispersed, he was delighted to find that he had collected 10 life-stealer cores. Bai Xiaochun's wits come out on top again. Looking very pleased, he stored the cores safely in his bag of holding and then blurred into motion, heading off to another part of the Wildweed Mountains. Not very long after he left, a young man could be seen in the jungle. His clothes were tattered, and he seemed to be in a very sorry state. He was shaking, and even had trouble walking. A blank look could be seen in his eyes that very closely resembled the look which had appeared in Bai Hanlai's eyes not so long ago. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he muttered, "What's going on in the Wildweed Mountains? What's going on with the world? The beasts here don't eat people, they. I. Days flew by. Bai Xiaochun used the aphrodisiac pill to throw the Wildweed Mountains into complete chaos. Everywhere he went, the beasts would go mad. Of course, before throwing the pills out into the air, he would always call out to make sure he was alone. Occasionally disciples would respond, and when they did, he would carefully explain his plan, ask them to leave, and give them a life-stealer core as compensation. He would also ask them to spread word to other disciples to stay away. Most of the disciples that saw him recognized him, and would flee, trembling in fear. There weren't many Spirit Stream Sect disciples in the Wildweed Mountains, only a few dozen. The area didn't have many Foundation establishment level beasts, but it still had its dangers, even for inner sect disciples. Only people who considered themselves to be especially powerful would go there. When Bai Xiaochun cried out his warnings, some disciples would respond and heed his advice. They would take his apology gift and leave. However, a few bull-headed individuals would arrogantly assume that he was crying out for help, and would pretend they couldn't hear him. Some of them even hoped to collect his bag of holding after he died. They would continue whatever it was they were doing, and think little more of the matter. But it wouldn't take long before they realized the beasts were acting strange, impulsive and maddened. Shangguan Tianyu was in the Wildweed Mountains, and as soon as he heard Bai Xiaochun calling out, his eyes flickered, and he ignored him. He was on the same mission as Bai Xiaochun, looking for lifestealers, but at the moment, he was shocked by the sight of a huge bear in the 6th level of qi condensation, who was wrapped around a tree, banging into it over and over again. It wasn't his first time seeing something like that. He'd seen a rabbit earlier that had ambushed him with raving madness. When he realized that the situation seemed familiar, his scalp suddenly went numb. Something's off here. What's changed in the Wildweed Mountains? Then he thought back to Bai Xiaochun's aphrodisiac pill, and his heart seized. By this point, Bai Xiaochun had over 30 lifestealer cores in his bag of holding, and was continuing his work with the aphrodisiac pills. About half a month later, he was overjoyed to discover a V-shaped valley located deep within the mountains, a place that had a strong wind. The valley would suck in the wind and then vent it out to fill a large portion of the Wildweed Mountains. Based on Bai Xiaochun's calculations, it would only take 3 days for the wind from the valley to fill nearly half of the Wildweed Mountains. Even standing there in the wind, he would only last for about one breath of time before losing his footing. He immediately felt connected to the place, as if by destiny. Hair whipping about, he looked down at the spot where the wind shot out and said, "This is definitely the best place to disseminate powder throughout the mountains. There shouldn't be any fellow disciples here either. I can safely harvest to my heart's content." Bai Xiaochun was starting to get very excited. In order to ensure nothing bad happened to his fellow disciples, he'd already given out about 10 cores. However, he didn't regret that at all. He was sure that he could get more. He could even visualize the merit points flowing in. Taking a deep breath, he brought out all of the rest of the aphrodisiac pills and crushed them. The rushing wind immediately carried the powder out into the rest of the Wildweed Mountains. Bai Xiaochun stood on a nearby mountain peak, looking out proudly at the jungle below, feeling very heroic. I, Bai Xiaochun, have worked tirelessly to benefit the Wildweed Mountains. One can only imagine how many animals will be born in the coming years. What a wonderful meritorious service. He sighed emotionally as howls began to rise from within the forest. More and more howls could be heard, until they filled the air ceaselessly. In one day, 20% of the Wildweed Mountains had been covered. The roars reached a shocking level. 3 days later, half of the Wildweed Mountains were going mad. At that point, Bai Xiaochun flew along, dispersing pheromone pills every so often to attract the nearby beasts. At the same time, he collected more and more lifestealer cores. He was very pleased with everything. Not only was he collecting plenty of cores, he was also bringing happiness to all the creatures in the Wildweed Mountains. When he saw so many animals pouncing on each other, he couldn't help but marvel at how he was benefiting the environment. What a good person I am, he thought to himself. The beasts in these mountains are definitely going to thank me later. And so he continued along, throwing out pheromone pills all the way. Of course, there were some disciples in the mountains who had ignored his earlier cries. Their eyes soon went wide at the maddened state of the animals. The sight of all the animals pouncing on one another left the disciples gasping. What's going on? Why does this scene seem so familiar? Shocked, the disciples all began to flee in terror. Bai Xiaochun, Shangguan Tianyu was going all out to kill the nearby beasts and fly away. His heart filled with terror when he recalled what had occurred to Bai Hanlai, and he began to shiver. Unfortunately for this handful of people, they were deep within the Wildweed Mountains, and getting out was no easy task. That was especially the case considering that all of the beasts in the area were going completely mad. Bai Xiaochun flew along, happily tossing pheromone pills around. He attracted large numbers of beasts, and collected numerous lifestealer cores. By the time he left the Wildweed Mountains half a month later, he had 200 cores in his bag of holding. Completely satisfied, he headed back toward the sect. Some days after he left, Shangguan Tianyu and the other disciples finally emerged. Their faces were pale and filled with bitterness, and their hair disheveled. They were all in bad condition, with blank looks on their faces. After finally emerging, they would throw their heads back and howl bitterly. As for what exactly had occurred within those mountains, it was a complete mystery to them. After returning to the sect, Bai Xiaochun raced directly to the missions office. When the disciples there saw that he was turning in 200 lifestealer cores, their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. After incredulously examining the cores, they looked back at Bai Xiaochun in shock. Throughout the years, lifestealer core missions would pop up occasionally, although usually only one at a time. Generally speaking, it would take a whole year for a disciple to collect a mere 10 of them. But within a few months, Bai Xiaochun had managed to collect an unthinkable amount. He definitely deserves to be the junior brother of the sect leader, a prestige disciple, and the first place winner of the chosen battles. The other inner sect disciples looked enviously at Bai Xiaochun. After clearing his inventory, he racked up 200,000 merit points. Although he tried to put on a show of looking indifferent, it was impossible for him to completely conceal how proud of himself he was. The matter shook the entire South Bank. Anyone who heard that someone had collected 200,000 merit points in one shot almost couldn't believe it. But then word began to spread from the disciples Bai Xiaochun had advised to leave the Wildweed Mountains, and soon, the 3 mountain peaks of the South Bank were buzzing with the news. What a monster. Crazy. He filled half of the Wildweed Mountains with aphrodisiac pills. We won't be able to go there for a long time now. Even as the discussions raged, Shangguan Tianyu and the other bedraggled disciples began to filter back into the sect. Shangguan Tianyu was aware that Bai Xiaochun was the cause of what had happened, so he wasn't so surprised at the results. But when the other disciples realized the situation, they howled at the tops of their lungs. However, there was nothing they could do about Bai Xiaochun. After all, he had warned them repeatedly, and they had heard, but chosen to ignore him. Now they regretted what they had done, a mere response on their part, and they could have avoided such a tragic fate. Bai Xiaochun was extremely pleased with the results. In subsequent days, he would often appear at the missions office, whereupon he would select missions involving collecting things from beasts. He almost seemed addicted. After each mission, he would concoct batches of medicinal pills and head out again. Each time, he drove more disciples mad. Whether those disciples were out on missions or not, it didn't matter. After all, any location Bai Xiaochun went to on his own missions had to be avoided for significant periods of time afterward. They were far too dangerous. The Cloud Peak Mountains, Frost Forest Mountains, Bright Summit Mountains, Last East Mountains. For an entire year, Bai Xiaochun was a mission-accomplishing maniac. He swept through all of the missions that involved beasts, and his harvests were always incredible. Each and every time, the missions office was left completely shaken. At the same time, countless inner sect disciples were driven to madness. Eventually, he cleared all of the beast-related missions on Fragrant Cloud Peak, after which he went to Green Crest Peak, and then Violet Cauldron Peak. He took all of the missions there, and soon helped the disciples there realize what a true missions fiend was. In the end, the inner sect disciples of the South Bank were driven to complete despair. None of the mountain ranges near the sect were safe to enter, as they were filled with countless sexually charged beasts. Having no other option, hundreds of inner sect disciples from the 3 mountain peaks signed a petition to the sect, requesting that Bai Xiaochun be exempted from mission service. Li Qinghao didn't want to interfere. It was a rare occasion when Bai Xiaochun was so enthused about serving the sect. The matter turned into a huge headache for the sect leader. He was coming to find that after Bai Xiaochun joined the sect, he would frequently be struck with such headaches. Every time he heard Bai Xiaochun's name mentioned, he would subconsciously sigh. It's almost better when he's not working hard. As soon as he gets serious, it's really, Bai Xiaochun causes a disaster no matter which mission he picks. Doesn't he want to work at pill concocting? Go concoct pills then. The sect will provide the merit points, as long things calm down. When the signatures on the petition rose from a few hundred to over 1,000, the sect leader gritted his teeth and went to discuss the matter with Li Qinghao. Finally, they exempted Bai Xiaochun from mission service for the following 10 years. He was the only disciple in the sect who didn't have to do missions, but would still get a huge amount of merit points from the sect. Bai Xiaochun wasn't very happy about the situation. He had been browsing missions at the missions office, and had just found one he wanted to take when he got the notification. He was stunned. What the hell? he exclaimed loudly. I want to serve the sect. I want to work hard. This is ridiculous. Under the solemn gazes of the missions office disciples, he sighed, then stuck his chin up and swished his sleeve. With the snap of a finger, I reduced the missions office to ashes. Shaking his head, he sighed. Looking very lonely, he made his way off into the distance. Bai Xiaochun trudged back to his immortals' cave, where he sat stewing in melancholy. Finally, he sighed. It's not a good thing for someone to be too outstanding. I'm the perfect example. The sect leadership was so worried about how outstanding I am that they exempted me from doing missions for 10 years, but will still send me merit points every month. He sat there, reveling a bit in being able to worry about things like this, and wondering what he was supposed to do considering that he was so outstanding. Ah well, I guess it doesn't matter. Since I can't go out on missions, I might as well concoct medicine. After all, the reason I was doing the missions in the first place was to get merit points. With such thoughts on his mind, Bai Xiaochun resigned himself to sacrificing his own benefit for the betterment of the sect, and walked over to his medicine concocting workstation. I need to master all of the concocting methods for Tier 3 spirit medicines. With that, his expression turned somber. Time passed. Half a year. Other than his routine cultivation, he spent all of his time concocting medicine. When he lacked ingredients, he cashed in merit points. As time went on, he grew more frenzied, apparently unwilling to slow down until he had mastered everything to do with Tier 3 spirit medicines. Because he wasn't out doing missions, the sect slowly returned to normal. Many people sighed in relief, especially sect leader Zheng Yuandong, who was finally able to feel at ease inwardly. By now, he was sure that exempting Bai Xiaochun from mission duty had been the right thing to do. He wasn't the only one. Li Qinghao, as well as the other South Bank peak lords and elders, all felt much more at ease. In fact, at one of the regular South Bank Council meetings, the Foundation establishment cultivators happened to bring up the matter. Bai Xiaochun has been focused on concocting medicine lately. The sect has really calmed down. Medicine concocting is a good thing. Have him keep practicing. It's the safest option, anyway. With him focused on that, he won't be causing problems for people outside. The entire group was all smiles. The past half year of peace and quiet left them all sighing happily. And yet, just days after their meeting, a massive explosion echoed out on Fragrant Cloud Peak. It came from the direction of Bai Xiaochun's immortals' cave, and caused everything in the area to tremble violently. Numerous inner sect disciples were badly startled, and the outer sect disciples were left trembling in fear. What just happened? Heavens! Could the spirit stream sect be under attack? As everyone devolved into a commotion, Bai Xiaochun lurched out of his medicine concocting workstation, coughing, face tinged with ash, nose running and tears streaming down his face. He quickly washed off in the hot spring, and then frowned. Why did it explode? He thought. The pill furnaces provided to inner sect disciples were all standard issue, exactly the same as the ones in the medicine concocting pavilion. Generally speaking, even if the spirit medicine was concocted incorrectly, they wouldn't just explode. And yet, that was exactly what had just happened. It had even activated the cave's defensive spell formations. After pondering the matter at length, he couldn't come up with an explanation. Sighing, he went back to cultivating the dragon mammoth sea-forming scripture for a few days. By this point, his cultivation was only a sliver away from a breakthrough. However, he wasn't in any hurry. After finishing his cultivation, he consumed some spirit medicine to replenish his vital energy, then set to work on the undying live forever technique. The silver light which rose up from his skin was now so dark that it bordered on golden. That afternoon, Bai Xiaochun went on to the next task at hand. Standing there in his immortal's cave, he slowly lifted his hands up into the air as he practiced the Water Swamp Kingdom mnemonic. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, he opened his eyes and let out a powerful shout. An intense energy exploded out from inside him, causing everything around him to suddenly change. A field of water vapor appeared, which lasted for only a single breath of time before vanishing. Bai Xiaochun sagged in place, wiping the sweat from his brow. Despite practicing the Water Swamp Kingdom every day since he'd acquired it, that was all that he could accomplish. I need to keep working harder, he thought. After resting for a moment, he ended his daily cultivation routine and once again pondered the problem of the exploding pill furnace. During the past half a year of practice, he had succeeded with a few Tier 3 spirit medicines, but for the most part, his attempts had ended in failure. He sat there in frustration for some time before finally coming up with a theory. Maybe after the medicinal strength intensified to a certain point, it became unstable, which caused the explosion. Immediately afterward, he hurried out and exchanged some merit points for another pill furnace, then went back to concocting. Gradually, word spread that the explosion earlier had come from Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave. Strange expressions appeared on the faces of the disciples. Although they weren't sure exactly what had caused the explosion, at least they now knew Bai Xiaochun was the cause. Then, a few days later, Bai Xiaochun was there in his medicine concocting workstation, completely and utterly focused on controlling the spirit medicine inside the pill furnace. Unfortunately, TIER3 spirit medicines were extremely difficult to work with. Most other people, with enough experience and luck, would succeed 3 times out of 10 and consider it a high rate of success. But Bai Xiaochun wanted things to be perfect. He wouldn't rest until he'd solved each and every problem. Because he wanted even the tiniest details to be perfect, it meant he had to test all those details multiple times before finally resolving every issue. This time, his eyes went wide as he realized that he was losing control of the spirit medicine. Then the pill furnace began to issue cracking sounds. Bai Xiaochun gasped, and 2 wings suddenly appeared behind him as he bolted out of the medicine concocting workshop. Moments after he emerged, a huge explosion shook the immortals cave. Fragrant Cloud Peak was once again thrown into an uproar for some time before everyone managed to calm down. 3 days later, Bai Xiaochun ran screaming out of his medicine concocting workstation, and a third shocking explosion ripped through the air. After 7 days, he emerged yet again, flustered, fleeing at top speed as a 4th deafening explosion nearly destroyed his medicine concocting workstation. Fragrant Cloud Peak was in utter chaos, and countless disciples' eyes were completely bloodshot. After inquiries were made, people learned that Bai Xiaochun was concocting medicine. However, no one could figure out exactly why such huge explosions would be occurring. I asked the spirit medicine pharmacy, and they said that he recently purchased 8 pill furnaces. That sound must be an exploding pill furnace. Just what is Bai Xiaochun concocting? Damn it, isn't he worried about blowing himself up? Anger was building, and yet the explosions weren't over. They continued. Over the course of the following month, 7 explosions rocked Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave, each one more intense than the last. The final explosion actually caused all of Fragrant Cloud Peak to tremble, and Bai Xiaochun's entire immortals cave was nearly destroyed. As Bai Xiaochun fled outside, trembling in fear, the outer and inner sect disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak were driven to near madness. During the past month, none of them had been able to safely focus on practicing cultivation. Constantly being startled by the explosions had left them jumpy with fear. Now, they were thoroughly distracted, their eyes bloodshot as they struggled to control their anger. Apparently, even sound-muffling spell formations couldn't stop the sound of the explosions. The disciples' rage grew, and even the elders were shocked and could hardly believe what Bai Xiaochun was doing. What is Bai Xiaochun concocting to cause the pill furnaces to explode like that? What medicine is he working on? Things didn't end. Over the next month, the frequency of the explosions increased. More than a dozen occurred, almost every other day. Eventually, the Fragrant Cloud Peak disciples couldn't take it any longer, and stormed to Bai Xiaochun's immortals cave en masse to vent their fury. Feeling very wronged, Bai Xiaochun hurried out to offer an explanation. When he saw a mob of over 1,000 disciples, his face paled a bit, and eventually he resorted to slapping his chest and guaranteeing that there would be no more explosions. Only then did the crowd begin to calm down. After seeing everyone off, Bai Xiaochun went back into his immortals cave, scowling the entire time. Looking over his mostly destroyed medicine concocting workstation, he sighed, pulled out another pill furnace, and looked at it blankly. A few days later, he slapped his thigh, and his eyes began to shine. Right, it's definitely because I didn't preheat the pill furnace properly. Excited, he started concocting again. 3 days later, in the middle of the night, everyone on Fragrant Cloud Peak heard a massive explosion. One inner sect disciple was so badly frightened that he almost fainted. Hair in complete disarray, he screamed, "Bai Xiaochun! I don't care if you're chosen, I'm going to beat you black and blue." He wasn't the only one. Soon, all of the inner sect disciples had emerged from their immortals caves, even the exhausted Zhou Xinqi. Bai Xiaochun hurried out, smiling apologetically as he guaranteed that it wouldn't happen again. The gathered disciples calmed down a bit in response. They couldn't find any fault with his attitude, and as such, had no other recourse. If he had been even a bit defiant, they definitely would have given him a good thrashing. But at the moment, they could only grit their teeth and accept his promise. Exhausted, Bai Xiaochun returned to his immortal's cave, wishing to cry but finding no tears. He was coming to find that it was a difficult thing to pursue his dreams. I'm not the kind of person who gives up, he thought. Gritting his teeth, he produced another pill furnace, which he studied for half a month straight. Finally, after analyzing all aspects of the situation, he was sure that he had identified the problem. Earth flame. It's definitely the earth flame. Eyes bloodshot, he once again began to concoct. 5 days later at dawn, an explosion could be heard that was so loud it startled Li Qinghao, and could even be heard on Violet Cauldron Peak and Green Crest Peak. The inner sect disciples who lived near Bai Xiaochun's immortal's cave were dumbstruck, especially Zhou Xinqi. All of them felt like they were going crazy. Elder Zhou's birds let out high-pitched shrieks, and were so frightened that their feathers fell out. The spirit-tail chickens were trembling and frothing at the mouth, and numerous inner sect disciples struggled to remain conscious. All of the spell formations in Bai Xiaochun's cave activated as the earth flame erupted, and even Fragrant Cloud Peak's grand spell formation was affected. When Bai Xiaochun crawled out of the rubble, he was pitch black, and yet clearly excited. He was now sure that he had finally found the source of the problem. It wasn't the earth flame, it was the techniques of mutual augmentation and suppression. They cause an unforeseeable variable. Tier 3 spirit medicines must be concocted with mutual augmentation and suppression in mind. Everyone on Fragrant Cloud Peak, from the elders to the outer sect disciples, rushed over toward Bai Xiaochun's cave, enraged, rocks in hand to pelt him if necessary. When faced with such a furious mob, Bai Xiaochun vigorously slapped his chest. I guarantee, however, before he could finish, the crowd began to hurl their rocks. After all, fighting with magic against a fellow sect member was prohibited, but throwing rocks wasn't. Guarantee your ass. Countless rocks closed in, fueled by burning rage. Seeing the sky obscured by rocks struck fear into Bai Xiaochun's heart. He dove back into his immortal's cave and quickly activated the spell formation, looking like he was about to cry. He knew that he had aroused public fury, but truly felt wronged. He hadn't done it on purpose. I guarantee that this is the last time, he blurted. I'm absolutely certain. After the mob vented some of their anger, Bai Xiaochun continued to offer explanations, and eventually, the people left. Sighing wistfully, Bai Xiaochun cleared the rubble from his immortal's cave and then returned to his medicine-concocting workstation. There he sat, pondering everything that had occurred. Finally, he gritted his teeth and gingerly produced another pill furnace. Based on his most recent analysis, he once again began to concoct medicine. This time, he focused heavily on the techniques of mutual augmentation and suppression. A few days later, a fragrant aroma filled the air, and Bai Xiaochun's eyes brimmed with tears of excitement. He let out a whoop of delight at having finally solved the problem of the exploding pill furnaces. Furthermore, he'd gained a deeper understanding of the variables which can occur because of mutual augmentation and suppression. I'm just around the corner from mastering Tier 3 spirit medicines. Spirits soaring, he spent the next several days completely lost in his medicine concocting. Gradually, the disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak realized that there were no more explosions. They sighed with relief, and as the days passed, the mountain slowly returned to normal. And yet, Bai Xiaochun had come to find that although he'd solved the problem of the explosions, his success rate with Tier 3 spirit medicine was still fairly low. Furthermore, he ended up concocting quite a few mystery pills. When such mystery pills emerged from the pill furnace, he would look at them suspiciously. Although he knew that they surely contained wondrous secrets, it was hard to say whether they were as miraculous as his aphrodisiac pill. I need to test them out to see what they do, he murmured to himself. Emerging from his immortal's cave, he headed down to the market and bought some random animals. He even spent some merit points to get some from the sect. Back in his immortal's cave, he prepared, for the second time in his life, to perform some animal testing. He even produced a blank jade slip to record the data. After all the preparations were complete, he took a deep breath and pulled out a rabbit, then selected a black pill from his collection of mystery pills. The rabbit sniffed it, then gobbled it up. A moment later, it began to tremble. Then its legs twitched, and it flopped over and lay unmoving on the ground. Dead? Bai Xiaochun thought, eyes going wide. After looking closer, he breathed a sigh of relief when he realized that the rabbit wasn't dead, but rather had simply fallen unconscious because of the rush of spiritual energy from the powerful medicinal pill. A few hours later, it woke up. This time, it stood up on two legs, almost like a person, and stared fixedly at Bai Xiaochun. Ee, Bai Xiaochun said. Moments later, the rabbit made the same sound, startling Bai Xiaochun. You can talk? Looking startled, the rabbit said, You can talk? Bai Xiaochun immediately got very excited, and began to walk around the rabbit to examine it. In turn, the rabbit got excited and began to walk around Bai Xiaochun. A strange scene was now playing out in the immortals' cave. Finally, Bai Xiaochun began to laugh heartily. Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk. The rabbit laughed heartily and repeated the exact same words he had just spoken. A quizzical look on his face, Bai Xiaochun opened the door of one of the side rooms and tossed the rabbit inside. Whatever, you're obviously not intelligent. If you make some cultivation advancement, don't forget to come back and thank me in the future. I'll put you in here for now, and in a few days I'll set you free outside the sect. After putting the rabbit in the other room, Bai Xiaochun paid it no further heed as he proceeded with his testing. The next subject was a monkey, for which he selected a yellow medicinal pill. At first, the monkey pretended not to see it, but eventually got interested and grabbed the pill up. After sniffing it, it crushed some of the pill, and then popped the pill and the fragments into its mouth and swallowed it down. Afterward, nothing much happened except that an odd wind rose up out of nowhere, which quickly faded away. Bai Xiaochun looked curiously at the monkey, which was simply sitting there with a vacant expression on its face. Unsure if anything had occurred, Bai Xiaochun sighed and put the monkey into the same room as the rabbit. A few days later, one of the tests he performed was on a group of rabbits. After eating the medicinal pills, their eyes turned red, and they began to howl and leap up to nibble Bai Xiaochun's legs. Shocked, he made a notation in his records, then threw them into a side room. There, they started biting each other, although they drew no blood. There was also a handful of ducks. After consuming the mystery pills, they trembled, and suddenly, their wings grew larger, and they began to fly around inside the immortals' cave, looking particularly elegant. Bai Xiaochun stared in shock, and at the same time, his excitement regarding his mystery pills grew. Time flowed by. During the following half-month, Bai Xiaochun performed tests with his mystery pills, keeping meticulous records of everything. Occasionally, his wild laughter would ring out from within the immortals' cave. A few days later, when he fed some pills to some ordinary chickens, they rapidly grew larger until they were the size of elephants. Bai Xiaochun's understanding of the Tao of medicine was growing more profound. Shaking with excitement, he continued his experiments. Gradually, the rooms he had set aside for the animal subjects included quite a variety of strange beasts. There was a group of toads with eyes all over their bodies. Those eyes would all blink every time the toads croaked. There was a tiger that Bai Xiaochun had bought for a handful of spirit stones. After consuming one of his pills, it grew 8 more heads, giving it a total of 9. When it roared with all of its heads, the sound was very impressive. There was also a group of ordinary pigeons who experienced no major change other than constantly relieving themselves as they flew along. Time passed, the experiments continued, and the bizarre and extraordinary results of the mystery pills became more evident. There was a group of monkeys who, after eating some strange pills, began to twitch constantly. There was a bunch of cats who let out burps as loud as thunder. Bai Xiaochun was struck with awe, and couldn't help but wonder exactly how he had concocted all of these mystery pills. The most exaggerated situation was the flock of geese. After eating the medicinal pills, their eyes turned pure white. Although they looked a bit sickly, they turned out to be extremely loyal, and even took to watching over Bai Xiaochun's cave as if they were guarding it. Toward the end, he gave the hot spring fish some pills to eat. They immediately went crazy, struggling with each other to leap out of the water. There, they grew legs and began to walk around the immortals' cave. After examining the fish, he threw them into another side room. By this point, the side rooms were filling up, and his immortals' cave was turning into a bizarre menagerie. There was a monkey who simply sat in place, chin resting in its palm, apparently lost in thought. There was the group of spasmodically twitching monkeys. The red-eyed rabbits were currently fighting with the elephant-sized chickens. Off to the side were the toads who blinked and croaked noisily. Finally, there was the rabbit, who was practicing all sorts of poses. Occasionally it would say, "Ee, you can talk? Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk." It was only able to recite those 3 passages. Up in the air, ducks flew about gracefully. The pigeons also flapped about, excrement plopping down below them wherever they went. The 9-headed tiger was covered in it and roared constantly. Off to the side were the legged fish, who were constantly on the run from the burping cats. At the door were the large geese, who eyed everything coldly, as though they were guarding against something. Bai Xiaochun stared around at everything, musing that he had only tested a small portion of his mystery pills. Unfortunately, he had no more animals to test them on. The Tao of medicine is truly miraculous, he murmured. With that, he decided that he definitely had to test out all of his mystery pills. Therefore, he left the Immortals' cave to go purchase more animals to experiment with. However, almost as soon as he left, his second test subject, the thoughtful monkey who had done nothing except stare off into space, suddenly looked up thoughtfully. Then it turned its gaze to the door in the side room, and its eyes seemed just as intelligent as a person's. Suddenly, it burst into motion, running over, to open the door. Next, the main gate of the Immortals' cave was flung wide open. The sun shone outside as the thoughtful monkey leapt out into the open. The other animals stared in shock, but a moment later, all of them made their escape. By chance, Zhou Xinqi happened to be walking out of her Immortals' cave at that same moment. She saw a flock of quacking ducks flying gracefully out into the open, and her jaw dropped. She had long since mastered all 5 volumes of spirit creatures, but she had never seen anything like these flying ducks. "What are those things?" she murmured. Next, she was shocked to see several elephant-sized chickens racing out. Perched atop one of them was a rabbit. "Ee, you can talk? Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk." Zhou Xinqi stood there blinking in shock, wondering if she was hallucinating. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.